On March 4th, 2024, a white Toyota Camry rolled into my shop just after 8 in the morning with a check engine light that had been burning for 6 weeks. The owner had already been to 2 places. The first shop told him the catalytic converter was shot and quoted him $1,400. The second shop ran a smoke test, agreed with the first, and upped the number to $1,800. He came to me as a last resort, not because he trusted me more, but because he had simply run out of hope that the answer would be anything other than expensive. He handed me the paperwork. Code P0420. Catalyst system efficiency below threshold. 2 pages of diagnostic notes, shop stamps, and a list of recommended parts. The car had 112,000 miles on it. In every mechanic's handwriting, the verdict was the same: the converter is gone, time to replace it. I had him pull it into the bay. I plugged in my scanner. I did not order anything. I did not pull the converter. I did not quote him a single part. 24 hours and a $20 bottle of additive later, the P0420 code never came back. He drove that car for another 2 years without a converter replacement. Today I am showing you the exact Japanese technique that made that possible, and why the repair shops that quoted him $1,800 either did not know about it or chose not to try it first. There is a belief so deeply embedded in American automotive culture that almost nobody questions it. When the catalytic converter code appears, the converter is dead. End of conversation. New part, big bill, move on. I held that belief for the first several years of my career. Then I visited a repair facility outside of Osaka, Japan, that specialized in high-mileage fleet vehicles, taxis, delivery vans, and commuter cars that would have been considered end-of-life in most Western markets. What I saw there changed how I think about catalytic converters entirely. The shop was not impressive by American standards. No flashy diagnostic equipment on every wall, no polished showroom. What it had was patience. A philosophy that treated the catalytic converter not as a part that wears out, but as a surface that accumulates problems it was never designed to hold. And once you understand that distinction, everything about how you handle code P0420 changes. The catalytic converter is one of the most misunderstood components in your entire car. Most people think of it as a box buried in the exhaust that magically cleans pollution. What it actually is a chemical reaction chamber lined with a ceramic honeycomb substrate coated in precious metals, platinum, palladium, and rhodium. Those metals act as catalysts. When hot exhaust gases pass through, they trigger chemical reactions that convert carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide, unburned hydrocarbons into water vapor, and nitrogen oxides into harmless nitrogen. It happens thousands of times per minute, silently, invisibly, and without any moving parts. Your car's computer monitors this process using 2 oxygen sensors. One sits upstream before the converter, measuring the exhaust coming from the engine. One sits downstream after the converter, measuring what came out. In a healthy system, those 2 readings look completely different. The upstream sensor fluctuates rapidly, bouncing between rich and lean, reflecting the combustion cycle. The downstream sensor should be calm and steady because the converter has done its job. When both sensors start showing similar activity, the computer draws one conclusion: the converter is no longer doing its job. Code P0420 gets logged, and the check engine light comes on. Here is where the industry gets it wrong. P0420 does not mean the converter is destroyed. It means the computer detected inefficiency. And inefficiency has a range of causes that most shops skip over entirely. They see the code, they confirm the code with a scanner, and they write up the estimate. Because the converter is the most expensive answer, shops often list replacement first. But what actually causes a catalytic converter to become inefficient before it truly fails? This is the question almost no one asks, and the answer is where the Japanese method begins. The most common trigger is not a dead converter, it is a coated one. Over time, especially in vehicles driven primarily on short trips, the converter never fully reaches operating temperature. The chemical reactions inside require heat, typically between 400 and 800 degrees Celsius, to function properly. Short trips mean the converter spends most of its life in warm-up mode, too cool to fully catalyze, and too cold to burn off the carbon and hydrocarbon residue that clings to the substrate. Layer by layer, over thousands of short drives, the honeycomb coating becomes choked. The precious metals get buried, the chemical surface area shrinks, efficiency drops. The computer sees it and throws the code. The second killer is oil contamination. Engines that burn even a small amount of oil push vaporized oil into the exhaust stream. That vapor coats the substrate in a film that blocks the catalyst surface in a way carbon alone does not. It bakes on, hardens, and cannot be burned off with heat alone. This is why mechanics sometimes see P0420 codes even on relatively young, low-mileage engines. It is not age, it is oil consumption they did not catch early enough. The third cause is misfires. Even a single cylinder that misfires occasionally sends raw, unburned fuel into the exhaust. That unburned fuel reaches the catalytic converter, ignites inside it, and causes localized overheating. The ceramic honeycomb substrate begins to melt and collapse. Once the internal structure physically crumbles, there is no cleaning it back to life. That is when replacement becomes unavoidable. But that is not what most people pulling a P0420 code are dealing with. Most drivers are dealing with a coated converter, not a broken one. And a coated converter responds to chemistry. In Japan, mechanics learned this distinction decades ago because they had no choice. Replacing a catalytic converter on a taxi with 350,000 kilometers was economically impossible. Parts costs, labor costs, and downtime made replacement a last resort, not a first response. So they developed a protocol built around one core idea. Before you replace anything, restore the chemical environment inside the converter and give it the chance to clean itself. The method centers on a specific type of fuel additive, not a generic cleaner, but a formula built around hydrocarbons that can survive combustion temperatures long enough to pass through the engine and reach the catalytic converter in a useful form. When that chemistry reaches the hot substrate, it softens accumulated deposits, raises the converter's internal operating temperature slightly, and allows the precious metal catalyst surface to be exposed again. As that surface comes back online, the efficiency reading climbs. The downstream oxygen sensor signal changes. The computer stops seeing similarity between upstream and downstream. The code clears. The product most commonly associated with this method in Western markets is cataclean. In Japan, similar formulations have been used for years, under different brand names and with more disciplined application protocols. The active chemistry is a blend of hydrocarbons, primarily naphtha and other light fractions, that acts as a controlled internal cleaning agent for the exhaust system. Here is where most people misuse this technique and convince themselves it does not work. They buy a bottle, dump it into a half-full tank of gas, drive around the neighborhood for 20 minutes, and check the light. Nothing happens. They throw away the receipt and conclude that catalytic converter cleaners are a mistake. The Japanese method does not work that way. It requires specific conditions, the right amount of product, the right tank level, the right driving profile, and most critically, the right operating temperature. Here is the protocol exactly as I learned it and have refined over years of use in my own shop. First, run your tank down to between 1/4 and 1/8 full. You want concentration. A full tank dilutes the chemistry too much to reach effective levels at the converter. Second, pour the entire bottle in before you add fresh fuel. Then fill the tank to about half. This gives you the optimal ratio. Third, drive. Not around town. Not to the grocery store and back. Highway driving, sustained speeds between 55 and 70 miles per hour for at least 30 minutes without stopping. What you are trying to accomplish is thermal saturation. The catalytic converter needs to be hot and stay hot while the treated fuel passes through it. At highway speed, under sustained load, the converter runs at peak operating temperature. That is where the chemistry does its work. Some vehicles require 2 or even 3 treatments before the code clears. This is especially true of engines with over 120,000 miles that have accumulated years of carbon layering on the substrate. Patience is not optional. This is the part of the Japanese philosophy that Western drivers find most frustrating. They want a one-dose miracle. The method does not offer miracles. It offers chemistry, time, and thermal energy working together. Now, I want to be direct with you about something because I said at the beginning of this video that this technique is called illegal, and that word deserves an explanation. The technique itself is not illegal. Catalytic converter additives like cataclein are sold legally in every state. What the title refers to is something more specific. In certain states with strict emissions regulations, primarily California under CARB standards, some versions of catalytic converter cleaning additives contain chemical compounds that fall outside approved formulations. The act of manipulating a catalytic converter's short-term readings to pass an emissions test using additives or any other method can be considered tampering under the Clean Air Act if done specifically to deceive a state emissions inspection. The framing of illegal refers to a gray area. Using this technique to pass a smog test on a converter that is genuinely beyond saving would be considered tampering with an emissions control device, which is a federal offense. But using this method to restore a converter that has been coated and degraded but not physically destroyed is not illegal. It is maintenance. The distinction matters. If your converter substrate is melted or physically collapsed inside, this will not save it. If you shake the converter and hear rattling, the honeycomb is crumbled and chemical cleaning cannot restore it. If you use an infrared temperature gun and see that the outlet temperature of your converter is lower than or equal to the inlet temperature at operating temperature, the catalyst is not generating exothermic reactions. That means it is no longer functioning, and no amount of chemistry will bring it back. Replacement is the correct answer in that case, and there is no shortcut. But if your converter passes a temperature gun test, if the honeycomb is intact, and if your engine has no active misfires and is not burning significant oil, the Japanese protocol gives you a legitimate chance to avoid thousands of dollars in unnecessary replacement. I always perform one diagnostic step before recommending this method. After scanning for P0420, I check for any concurrent misfire codes. P0300 through P0308 are the cylinder misfire codes. If those appear alongside P0420, address the misfires first. Every misfire pumps unburned fuel into the converter. Running a cleaning treatment through a misfiring engine while the engine is still misfiring is pointless. Fix the spark plugs, check the ignition coils, verify fuel injector function, then apply the cleaning protocol. I also check the downstream oxygen sensor directly. A lazy oxygen sensor that is slow to respond can mimic a failing converter to the computer. I have cleared P0420 codes permanently with a $90 downstream sensor replacement on vehicles where shops had quoted the full converter. The sensor is almost always cheaper than the converter, so rule it out first. The test is simple with a live scanner. Warm the engine fully, then watch the downstream sensor voltage. In a healthy system with a healthy converter, the downstream reading should be relatively flat, hovering around 0.6 to 0.8 volts. If it is swinging up and down almost as fast as the upstream sensor, the converter is not storing oxygen properly. If it is barely moving at all, suspiciously flat and slow, the sensor is the problem, not the converter. Get the diagnostics right before you pour anything into the tank. The technique only works when applied to the right problem. Applying it to the wrong problem wastes money and delays the real fix. After the treatment, clear the code using an OBD2 scanner. Do not skip this step. The code will not clear itself. You need to manually erase it and then complete a full drive cycle that includes a cold start, city driving, and sustained highway speed. The car computer needs to run its catalyst monitor test to completion. That usually takes 1 to 2 full drive cycles. During that window, the computer is watching the converter's behavior. If the converter is performing correctly, the monitor completes as passed and the code stays off. If the converter is still struggling, the code returns within a few days. That return is actually useful information. A code that stays gone after one treatment confirms a deposit problem that the chemistry resolved. A code that returns within 50 miles after treatment and a full drive cycle shows the converter has moved beyond what chemistry can fix. You have now confirmed a hardware failure with almost no money spent on parts. That diagnosis, that certainty, is worth something. Most shops charge you $150 to reach the same conclusion after replacing an oxygen sensor and staring at the same code. The driver who brought me that Camry could not believe the outcome, not because it seemed magical. He could not believe it because 2 shops with more equipment than I had skipped the cheapest and most logical first step entirely. They saw the code, confirmed the code, and went straight to the most expensive repair. The $20 bottle and a 45-minute highway run was never mentioned. Neither shop offered it. Neither shop tried it. That is not incompetence. That is incentive. Cleaning a catalytic converter with an additive does not generate revenue. A converter replacement does. This is the part of the automotive industry that costs American drivers billions of dollars a year. Not fraud, not dishonesty in the legal sense. Just a deeply ingrained habit of reaching for replacement before restoration. Japan, with its culture of extreme vehicle longevity and fleet economics that punish unnecessary parts costs, developed a different habit. Try chemistry first. Use heat. Be patient. Replace only what cannot be restored. Once you adopt that mindset, a P0420 code becomes a process, not a sentence. You check for misfires. You inspect the oxygen sensor. You verify the converter structure is intact. You apply the protocol correctly. You complete the drive cycle. And then you let the computer decide, not the shop, not the estimate. If the light stays off, you just saved yourself between $900 and $2,500, depending on your vehicle. If the light comes back, you now have absolute certainty that the replacement is necessary, and you authorized it with full knowledge instead of fear. Modern car ownership rewards the driver who understands the system, not the one who panics fastest or spends most freely. The converter is not your enemy. The code is not a death sentence. It is information, and now you know how to use it. If this saved you from writing a check you did not have to write, hit like. So other Toyota owners find this before they walk into a shop. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of straight-line diagnostic thinking every week. And drop in the comments what your shop quoted you for P0420, because I want to know how much money this community is collectively avoiding. The most expensive repair is always the one you authorize before you try everything else first.